So you'll have to forgive me as I go through this. Thank you for jumping on or just for watching this. I wanted to cover this. You may have heard of Alex Hormozi. I highly recommend you go check out this video where he goes through what he calls a stranger's business, but this is a chiropractor's business, and helps him to figure out how he can make more money. There were a couple of key points in this video that I feel like could use some additional understanding, or some parts that I feel like he just missed. Now, this is still a great video. There's awesome content in here. I've been doing direct response marketing for over 20 years, so there are some things that I picked up on that he may have actually gone over with this business owner off the video recording or in another session. That would make a lot of sense to me. However, I feel like it was still really good information that is worth you hearing or you seeing. So I'm going to jump around this a little bit, and as I said, this is my first stream, so you'll have to forgive me if the audio cuts out, if the video is weird, whatever it is. I'll try and touch this up and post, or whatever they say. I have no idea what I'm doing, but thank you for watching. All right, so let me get into this really quick. I'm not going to watch the whole video. I'm kind of going to cut to some key highlights, and I wanted to start off with this man's very successful. Alex Hormozi is also very successful, and there's nothing wrong with any of the advice he gave whatsoever. Like I said, there's just some key points here that I think he either missed, glossed over, or maybe he didn't pick up on because of the format in which he was doing it in. I'm sure that they picked it up later, or he felt like it was an obvious thing, or it was discussed at an earlier time. So I'm not faulting him for missing these things at all. However, if you're watching this, and a lot of people have gotten some great info from this video, I feel like it's crucial that he hits on a couple of key points that are also very, very important. So let me see if I can pull up some of my notes. Yeah, of course, here's my sticky notes with everything here. Okay, so as he goes over the beginning, what he's doing, this, about 1 in 7 new customers get a 10K treatment, but this build to insurance was really very important. He says that roughly 75% of his customers build to insurance. So 3 out of every 4 people that come in are using insurance to pay for his services. Now, this is very important, especially when he goes into later about some of the ideas he has or techniques he recommends. It doesn't quite fit with the model that people are using insurance to pay for this, and it can actually come back and be harder for him to deal with. So let me see. The other important thing is when he's talking about the number of appointments he gets. Now, this was one location, and he says it's an average month at one location. We don't know which location this is. My guess is it's his highest performing location. But he has an 80% show rate and a 71% close rate, which are phenomenal numbers. And it's really, this is another key point that I feel like he sort of glosses over, or maybe provides a strategy that would actually could potentially hurt this more than help. And that is where he gets into later on. So when he's talking about the numbers, let me see.
Okay, so let's see the numbers. So what are the numbers again?
So when he's talking about his numbers here, the important one that I want to get to is the CAC. So hold on.
Revenue is 5.2 million last 12 months. Profit 1.2. Net margin is about 23%. Our CAC is about 700.
All right, so in this slide here, he says his CAC is about 700. So I'm guessing he's averaging the locations. I think he has 6 locations, and he's averaging the CAC, the cost to acquire a customer, from all of them to $700. This is really important. I think this is one of those pieces that maybe he just missed, especially when you're looking at the LTV. And what I mean is when we go further down to this part, right?
And then as far as the challenge that we have is because we're insurance based, you don't get paid for like 36 minutes.
So let me go right here. So this is where it's really important. And this is where I feel like I'm missing some crucial numbers, and it's possible that Alex has these numbers, but I'm not entirely sure. So if we look right here, it shows this is the bottom of the screen. If you can see the top 3 clinics that he picked, where he said his top producer, his middle, and a lower. And the interesting thing with the lower is that still doesn't justify his CAC. So if we look at this, he has at his top producer, it's $72 cost to acquire a customer. At the low that he introduced, the cost to acquire a customer is $177. But just a few minutes ago, he said that his average cost to acquire a customer was $700. So how do you get to an average of $700 when the 3 locations you've picked out average closer to 120. So that tells me there's probably a few of these locations are either massively performing badly, or the data he's providing is missing some crucial numbers here, right? There's definitely something missing, and this is very important to understand because these numbers tell a different story than the numbers he just produced. So like when we look at this, he was saying right here, his CAC was 700. And this is for the combined of all of his 6 locations. But then just a couple minutes later, we pull it up, and even he's commenting like, hey, the ROAS in this is 1.5 and its CAC is 177. That's way lower than 700. And that's something that's like worth noting. It's like, oh, okay, so the 3 locations you showed me, they're still all really good as far as the CAC goes, especially if your LTV is 3,400. This massively throws the ROAS like way higher. Like I know he says his ROAS here is 1.5, but if we just go back, like I said, where he's saying here his LTV is $3,400. If he's paying $170 to acquire a customer, there's something missing here. I'm not sure what it is. That's why I said I believe he probably covered it in a different thing. But it's very important to note, because if it turns out that 3 of these other locations have absolutely abysmal numbers, maybe their close rate is atrocious, or something along those lines where he's sort of factoring that in. Oh, the cost to acquire a customer has gone up because these people have no clue how to sell. They're just really bad at it. And that because of those atrociously low numbers, the cost to acquire a customer skyrockets. So one of these 2 locations might have like $1,000 or $1,500 cost to acquire a customer, and then you average that in with your 3, which he says middle and lower, which are probably closer to his top producers, and all of a sudden that $700 makes sense. So it's really important to know this. Now, why is that important to know? Because of the advice that he gives them later on. So like I said, this stuff is, he's got some really good information here, really good idea of how he's digging through the data. I'm going to come back to the ads in a minute, but when he's talking here, so here in this strategy, and this is actually really important. This is why I bring it up. So he has the step 4 is what I would be looking at, especially when I have such a large cost to acquire a customer. Most likely on those other locations, that would bring that $700 up. He brings up a really key point here where he says, hey, you want to really set up your sales process in a checkbox fashion. Almost like do this, do this, do this. Like follow the steps, check the boxes. That way you can have the right connection, right? That I think is very, very important. Now, let me make sure here. Let's see. I don't want to use this volume. I'm going to turn this one down. Let's see. Is that better? That might be better. I think it was getting audio from 2 mics, and I apologize for that if that's the case. Like I said, it's my first stream. I'm very sorry, but I hope that helped. Okay, so in the sales process here, he talks about outlining. You get your guy to basically outline their best steps. This is what they do. This is how they sell. They hit all these key points. And it's very checkbox formulaic. This is really important on those 3 locations that are bombing. I worked with a client. He had one location did really well. We ironed out his sales process, ironed out the appointment, the follow-up, all that stuff. When he opened up a second location, he said he implemented those steps, which is important. Okay, we've got this good one. This is a great location. Let me implement, let me sort of systemize or operational, whatever jargon you want to use, right? Make a checklist for everything you have to do, give it to the next location. The next location, when it started, wasn't doing so well. Why was it? It wasn't because the process was bad or the audience was different. None of that was actually the case. The ads were exactly the same. The offer was the same. None of that needed to change. What he found out was the people weren't doing it. Right? And this is a crucial part that Alex doesn't really touch on. He kind of hints at it. He's like, oh, you give them this checklist and it should be brain dead simple. They just follow the checklist. The problem is you're dealing with people. You're not dealing with robots. Yes, I agree. You should give a checklist to someone and be like, hey, I know you've been doing this process completely differently for the last X amount of time, but I want you to follow this checklist now. It doesn't always go over that well. It really doesn't. It should, but it doesn't. And a lot of that's because some, not all, it's usually a very small portion, but enough that it causes disruption. Some employees feel entitled, as in they've been doing this position a certain way for so long that when you tell them to do it differently, they could feel hurt. Are you telling me I've been doing this wrong, or I'm not good enough the way I'm doing it now? They might feel insulted. What, you don't think I'm smart enough to be able to do this on my own? You have to give me a checklist that I have to follow and check the boxes. There's a lot of reasons why people will decide not to do the thing you're telling them to do. And one of the most crucial things I found whenever you're giving a business owner like this advice on how to improve their processes or change things up is that the employees do not always follow through. It's almost like an 80-20, where you'll say, hey, we're doing this stuff, and 80% of them just won't do it. It's not out of spite or out of hatred. It's just out of comfort. Well, I've been doing it this way for so long. Why do I have to change? And this is very common. And this is something he doesn't touch on here. I believe he does touch on it probably in one of his books or in person, but he doesn't touch on it here. And I think that is really key. Because if we look at all of this, okay, if my cost to acquire a customer is $700, if we cut that in half, the amount of profit that this guy now makes is astronomical compared to any of these other things he does. Fixing that one little thing, if we brought the average cost to acquire a customer down from 700 down to 300, forgetting everything else, that cuts his cost to acquire a new customer in average in below half. Everything else staying the same, his numbers will skyrocket, right? Because those locations that aren't doing so well will suddenly start doing a whole lot better. The money that he wasn't generating, that it was costing him, will suddenly turn into profit. It's almost like, it's like a switch, like a light bulb switch. It's just boom, all of a sudden I have profit. But the buy-in from the person is the hardest thing. Additionally, if you tack on the fact that the people who are doing the selling are the other doctors, the other chiropractic doctors, the more educated somebody gets, a lot of times the larger their ego gets, and they're more resistant to change. So if he has to go to another chiropractor and say, hey, I know you've been selling it this way, I want you to sell it this way, he might bump into a few more heads that need a little more convincing, and he may lose some people. That doesn't mean it's not worth doing. It's just something to keep in mind. But a lot of times that one thing is really important. Now, some of this stuff I don't agree with, but that doesn't mean it's wrong. And there's a way to implement it that makes sense. And that comes back to the ads. So when he's talking about the ads, he's actually breaking the ads down and saying, hey, let me see if I can pull it up. Yeah, all right. So he has these ads, and these ads are actually fine. And the reason why I say these ads are fine is because he's got an 80% show up rate. And his cost to acquire a customer is not the same thing as the cost for a lead. So if his cost to acquire a customer in the locations he's putting at on the high end is $150, that may mean he's paying, $5 a click. And so it's like, how many clicks before somebody becomes a lead, and how many leads until somebody becomes a customer? These points aren't addressed here, but I'm sure he looked at them. But it's one of those things where, okay, well, if our cost to acquire a click is really low, how many of them turn into leads? Maybe that page needs optimization. That's where like the offer he said isn't really there, needs to be there. But these are things that I wouldn't necessarily jump after immediately. And that's because of the LTV, his cost to acquire a customer, and his sales process. 80% show rate, 71% close rate. I'm not entirely sure I want to mess with the show rate or the close rate because they're already so high. And to think, oh, you can get a 10% bump on your close rate, that's unlikely. Now, I know that it's in his best location. It's more likely his other locations will improve on their show up in their close rate if he emulates in those locations what he's doing at the main location. I'm not entirely sure changing the offers up on the ads will produce any immediate benefits, with one caveat. He does not discuss retargeting ads. So a big piece that's missing out of this entire presentation, he never actually gets to it, like even when I went down all the way down to the bottom, and is he doesn't talk about bringing back previous customers. He doesn't address, hey, maybe we can create some sort of maintenance plan, especially since the owner admitted that most of the customers that come in, 3 out of 4, are coming in because of insurance-based reasons, accident or injury, right? So insurance is covering it. So how do you get it to be an easier process where you can get somebody coming back for more regular appointments where they're not necessarily reliant on insurance and aren't seeing you in that necessity point, right? And this is one thing where I differ, where he says, when are people most likely to buy? He's like, after you feed them a steak, but that's different. That's like fixing somebody's back, like fixing their entire, like going through a whole chiropractic process. And once they're all healed up, being like, hey, do you want another package? A lot of times they'll be like, but why? versus doing some sort of maintenance package, which chiropractic is very easy to do. Hey, you're all set, like after you go through the entire thing with the insurance and everything, insurance is covered up to this point or however much they're going to cover. Now, at this point, like, you should be recovered. However, we recommend a monthly maintenance plan for at least the next 6 months. You don't have to come in as frequently. It's like once a month. We can give you a good discount and we can get you in on a plan. I feel like that is a better option. And then he can contact all of the past customers. He can follow up with them, see how they're doing, offer them this sort of maintenance program, even if they've been out for a few months, and immediately see an influx in cash. Because a lot of times the only reason why people don't go back is they weren't given the option, meaning nobody offered it to them. And I feel like that is more of an important point than trying to change the front end closing process, which, remember, 80% show up rate, 71% close rate. And what he's trying to do now is add in a process that breaks that. That's what that front end lead magnet is, a $29 offer. I think that's a great idea for retargeting. So people have clicked on the ad, or the people who didn't show up, like they booked but they never showed, or maybe they showed but they didn't do an appointment with them. I think that's a great offer to send out to those people, but I would not interrupt the current front end process outside of looking, can we optimize the number of people who go from leads to appointments, because that close rate is so high, or how many people land on our page are actually signing up to, or are actually calling us, or are actually booking a phone call with us. Like, I would look at those numbers and see if I can affect those. I wouldn't necessarily put something in front where they have to give their card, especially if they're injured or if they were in an accident and they're fully expecting insurance to take care of it. A lot of people, I feel like there's going to be some hesitation there, especially if they've been out because they're injured. So they get injured on the job or there's an accident, their money might be shorter, and now you're here like, hey, give me money so you show up. I agree it's a good thing to do to get a card on file. If your show up rate was lower, even a 55 or 60% show up rate is fairly good for a location. So I wouldn't necessarily want to put that in there. I don't think it's a bad idea, though, to say, hey, to secure your appointment, can we get a card? Because if you decide not to show up, we'll have to charge you or whatever. Most people are fine with that. And it's just a good reminder to get them there. The rest of this was, fairly good. The local SEO traffic, I feel like that'll be more impactful with ad spend, and you can spend a couple of dollars on ad to get your notice out there. Another thing he doesn't mention, a lot of the advice he gives in this area, he's sort of glossing over the fact that 3 out of 4 people are insurance based, and he has this 30, 60, 90-day window. So some of the advice he gives, like I said, it's really good advice, but it's missing some of these crucial details that he had mentioned earlier in the video, but I feel like he probably discussed it with him at some point. Definitely agree with the whole, he's not spending enough on the platforms. You want to spend more, especially in the locations that seem to be doing really well. However, it's one of those things where I would want to ask him why. Like, why is every location have a different amount of spend? Why, when you have a location, aren't you spending more? I know he said that he's worked with an agency, so maybe he's just leaving it into the agency's hands, or he's getting some sort of report that's a generalized report showing all of the locations instead of it broken down. There's a few reasons why this could happen. Most of the time, I'm not a huge fan of agencies. You can just learn how to do this on your own, or you can train somebody how to do this fairly easily. You won't need an agency to do it. I usually say the only time you hire an agency is when you know what ads work, you know what ads to run, you know how to do all this, but you don't want to manage it. So you bring an agency in and you say, hey, these are the ads, this is the targeting, this is the format, you go and do this. And then I will tell you when to raise the budget. That way you don't have to hire an individual person to do it, or it's like, hey, I want more creatives like this, go make them. And they can do that. If you use an agency for anything else, it can be a little tricky. Now, there are some caveats. When I ran my agency, I knew what the hell I was doing. Most agencies don't. They say they do, but they don't. Otherwise, like I said, this is a really good video. There are some great points that he makes in here, but I feel like as a business owner, you're missing out on these. The last thing that I would say is the most crucial thing to anybody who's watching this or has a business or is thinking about implementing these things. The one thing he doesn't hit on that is very important is going back to your previous customers and selling them a new offer. So in this case, he just has the one out offer, the packages or whatever. He needs to come up with some new packages, some follow-up packages, some maintenance packages, and needs to sell those to his previous customers. They will turn from insurance-based customers to cash-based customers, and that will make the business a whole lot more profitable, and it'll most likely make it more desirable to sell. I can't tell you for sure because I'm not in that space, but I would imagine that a business that has recurring cash coming in that isn't insurance-based looks a whole lot more desirable than a business that requires a 30 to 90-day wait to get paid. Anyway, I highly recommend you check out his video. It's on his channel. I'll see if I can link it, if I can figure that out. And you can watch the whole thing, see my feedback. If you have any questions for me, feel free to reach out to me. I'm more than happy to help. I'm looking to do more of these kind of videos where I find people or marketers talking about stuff that it's just missing some pieces, or they're omitting giant portions of what you need to know. Alex really knows what he's talking about. He has some great resources. Always highly recommend him. But I feel like if you're watching this, you're missing out on these crucial details. I hope if you do find this video and watch it, that you get some benefit from it. And that's all I have to say for today. So if you guys follow my channel or whatever, I'll put out more videos like this. Till next time, maybe I'm just screaming into the void, but whatever it is fine by me. See ya.